be talking about some difficult issues this episode. Please curate your experience. We're going to be talking about upsetting things. We won't mention a lot of the specifics or details by name. We are talking overall about true crime, but if that's not something that you think you want to engage with today, please be mindful. Welcome back to the Ink Sink. I am Annie.
I'm Kaylee.
And this is our podcast about books and news and the stories we tell. Kaylee, we've been talking for like a while now, so I'm not going to ask you how you're doing. I know how you're doing.
We've been struggling, guys. The struggle to bring this to our 4 listeners has been truly momentous this morning.
Yeah, it has. So thank you for sticking with us, obviously. Kaylee, what rabbit holes have you been falling down lately?
That is a fantastic question. I have largely been researching true crime for obvious reasons.
Or reasons that will become obvious. If you clicked on this after knowing the title.
Yeah, which I hope you did. It's not just like somehow you just blind clicked into it, maybe.
Yeah, I don't think I'm gonna... Ooh. This is a rolly chat, everyone. I don't think I'm gonna give it like a clever title or anything. I think it's just gonna be like True Crime Why or something like that.
Well, it wouldn't be a fun, like, especially if like people are sensitive to it. Like we wouldn't want to like surprise, got him.
We're talking about true crime today.
Yeah, I know this is like your dream topic. You were like, I didn't have to research anything. I was ready.
Did. I
like to do it though.
I do.
It's the research you would have done no matter what.
Well, so it's more of a meta research. As like this time, I was actually just creating like a meta look at like what true crime is in general. And there are some fascinating studies out there that I'm going to be quoting from.
I'm so excited to hear this.
But I also have an intro. Kaylee, I'm going to hit you with some stats. You ready?
Hit me.
So today, currently, the top 10 iTunes podcasts, fully 4 of them are true crime. One is called Radioactive, the Karen Silkwood Mystery from ABC News, which is about a missing persons cold case. One is called Crime Junkie, which tackles a new crime every week. One is called Counterclock, which does true crime dramatizations, also from AudioChuck. And one is Dateline, which is famous for its true crime documentaries and other documentaries as well. And then currently on the top 10 most streamed shows in the US is Monsters, the Lyle and Eric Menendez story, which is about 2 siblings who killed their parents. And currently on the New York Times nonfiction bestseller list, combined print and ebook, Framed by John Grisham and Jim McCloskey, which the blurb for the book is Our Criminal Justice System Viewed Through the Struggles of 10 Wrongfully Convicted People to Achieve Exoneration. And then I found a couple historical examples, which I'm sure you did too. When I was in college was the peak Amanda Knox trial. So I always remember that one because I worked at a gym. I would just like walk into the office and it would be like every single TV was on a different channel covering the Amanda Knox story. And like people would be asking you about it when you came in to check in and be like, hey, you think she did it? And I'm like, what? No, I don't.
Let me scan your badge.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Get out of here, kid.
The other one I always think of with the true crime obsession is the O.J. Simpson trial. People would, I've heard, I wasn't there, but I've heard that people would take their lunch breaks at work to watch the trial, and that this is why we try not to have cameras in criminal trials anymore.
I mean, I don't know if that was like the only reason, but that was definitely the news. I was a child.
Yeah, I was too.
Yeah, so I was like a couple years older than you, and I was not interested, but like even I know like people were like fucking obsessed with it.
Yeah,
the cult of celebrity, even then I thought that was odd that it was started, I guess, with him as like because he was like a football guy, but like it just migrated. It was so strange. So even as a kid, I thought that was weird.
Absolutely. All this to say that true crime is very popular and has been popular for a very long time.
Very long time. Longer than I realized, actually.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Well, Kaylee, with that setup, tell us about some of the history that you found.
So you have to kind of consider the evolution of a genre and different approaches to true crime. So first off, what is true crime? It is genuinely just content of some sort, podcast, written word, documentaries about an instance of a crime that occurred. Frequently nowadays, it's going to be based on like missing people or murders, but it could be anything truly.
Yeah, I the definition that I wrote is a nonfiction narrative that leans into the personal stories about victims and perpetrators. I think that that's one of the main things about, or specifically the true crime media that we're going to be talking about, is that it goes into the personal stories. Like, it doesn't just give you like a high level like police report,
crime statistics.
Like they're giving you Jennifer was a 19-year-old girl who lived in Cincinnati, and then like moving on from there. And I think that that's one of the things that makes it so easy to get into, is because it becomes such an easy emotional hook to latch onto.
Oh yeah, I would say what we consider popular true crime, right now, probably started to really rise up in like the 1600s in London with the broadsheets and stuff, when printing and literacy was on the rise, truly, like, and more accessible to the middle class.
I did not do any research on the history. I was just looking at the psychology and stuff, but
we nail it every time. Good.
I think this is good. I think this is because we can have a conversation, and I can unfacetiously ask you. Yeah. So is this the Penny Dreadful era? Is that what we're talking about?
Sort of. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, just basically, it was really before the full on birth of like newspapers per se. So it started with clergymen and council members that were taking confessions. It was initially a quote unquote, air quotes, guys, a way to tell people not to do naughty things, but it was them making money off of this that they had specific insider access to. So yeah,
so
I mean,
they were like, here's what happened, and then like tacked on a morality thing at the end.
The triumphs of God over whatever. Yeah. Oh, well, so what I was going to say is that's like the popular conception. However, I think that we have, and we frequently and just admittedly acknowledged that we have a very Western-centric take on everything.
This is an American-focused podcast.
Chinese history has gone back way longer.
Their written history, yeah.
Oh, yeah. And like as a relatively stable society where you can track back written records of things, it wasn't about like murders or missing people. It was about like fraud cases. Yeah, and they actually have crime novels, court case fiction is what it's called, like from like historic times. Like, so that was like a genre that blew up. They know that it existed, some of records, like references, but they're missing some of the court case fiction that was originally referenced from like an earlier dynasty, but they have it from like later dynasties. They're like, oh, this is in the tradition of, which is how they know that it was
They're
older.
referencing back.
Yeah.
Oh my God, I didn't know that.
I was just laughing. I was like, it's not new.
No.
Like, nothing under the sun is new. I mean, for better and worse, we are who we are as a species. Like, there are things that we do that we've always done.
I listen to a lot of true crime podcasts because I am who I am, and it's like a joke among them that they keep getting interview requests from journalists who are being like, why are people so obsessed with true crime now? And to a person, they're all like, it's not new. It's not new. It's not new. I was listening to one, it was a story from the Dust Bowl where a family had been murdered, and the evidence got so degraded because everybody in like a tri-county area wanted to come see the murder site. So they all like trampled through the house and like destroyed the evidence and like took souvenirs and stuff. And it's like, that was the Dust Bowl. Why true crime now? No, always.
But media sensationalism is a problem in that it just makes people feel like everything's, more or worse now. It's not. People are people, and we've always been this way. It just puts a pressure on the knowledge, maybe. I think that we should just have a primer for like stuff like this that keeps coming up. Like, why is XYZ, criminal statistics? Like, let's go with ratios. Here's crime isn't any worse or better, or here's why true crime's always been around, and then just distribute. That way they can just send them the link and like, yes, I can interview if none of your questions are answered in this document.
That's how we should do. Actually, when I send this to you for the transcript and you edit it, we'll be able to just send this out as a link to people.
Yeah.
It's a public service, really, on our part.
Truly. But yeah, so I thought that was super interesting. Again,
that is fascinating.
As far as the more like Western-based, probably popularly conceived true crime as, it definitely started like a chaplain was visiting inmates and taking their confessions, providing them spiritual guidance, and then publishing it, sensationalizing it, like definitely like dramatizing it, like taking things out of like context, adding additional embellishments, describing lurid like executions that hadn't even taken place. Yeah, so the ethics of true crime as a genre, they're not new either, like the questions that we have, but it's always not been good.
So they were, in some cases, talking about things that had not actually happened?
Correct. Oh, yeah.
Wow.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, yeah. Wow, that crap goes all the way back.
Oh, yeah. The book that I found for the Chinese stuff, which I thought was just interesting, is it's like a translator's introduction, but like the book itself is called The Book of Swindles.
First of all, Book of Swindles?
Yes. I mean, it was about fraud. It was about like con men. It was basically like pyramid schemes back in the day, like the Madoff, all of the sensational media that attached to that.
Right.
I will say that I am slightly less concerned about the ethics of like white collar crime than murder. Because I just mean like it's not that there weren't victims and people have lost everything due to these criminals, but like the victims at least are mostly around and can sue people that are taking advantage of them.
Right.
And it's not like a family that's being re-traumatized every time somebody brings up these case details about their loved one's murder or likely murder, reasons why based on this evidence that they are probably dead and buried somewhere in an unmarked grave or whatever. Like that's
well, let's talk about it. Let's talk about the ethics. So there are different types of true crime, I should say. Defining the different types of true crime is about as vague as defining true crime itself. And one of the things that I felt like I realized through the research that I had kind of had a concept of but hadn't really defined for myself was that there are very different types of true crime media. I mean, there's more than two, but I decided to delineate them into two types. There's a public service type, which is mostly advocating awareness, but it is also participatory. It's asking, have you seen this person? Here is what they did, like the America's Most Wanted type of thing. And then there's the salacious gawking, which is very passive and meant to be about entertainment. And I think that when we talk about the salacious gawking, a lot of times that's going to be your white collar crime, like things that you could never have done anything about anyway, or a historical case. And then the more modern cases that are being covered in things like Serial or in things like America's Most Wanted or in things like Dateline, the idea is that you are either learning something or you are now aware of something to be on the lookout for in the future. So I thought that was really interesting, and I kind of drew the line between like America's Most Wanted versus like My Favorite Murder. And of course, people have a lot of different terms for this, like there's the voyeur versus the citizen detective type of media. But I think that there's also a difference between what they cover. So if we separate out like true crime about like murder and missing people, or sorry, murder and like super violent crimes versus white collar crimes or missing people who like are then found or like those cases are solved. I think that there is an ethical question of whether we should be consuming media about any of those more violent crimes. Like, is that media perpetuating those ideas into people's heads who might not have had those ideas before, versus like the white collar crime, you're just like, oh man, screw those people. Yes, let's make fun of them because they're jerks. And there's that catharsis there. And I think that it boils down to what people are looking for when they engage with true crime.
Yeah, I would agree with that. So some of the research that I did, one of the pieces that I actually came back to a couple times was actually let me pull it up really quick so I can get this correct. It's a New York Times opinion piece, actually. My sister was murdered 30 years ago, and true crime repackages our pain as entertainment. Mm-hmm. So this girl she was like 5, shared a room with her sister, and her sister died. Like, she was taken from their room. It's poly class. It was in the 90s. So
nightmare.
Yeah. And media sensationalism, obviously blew up. It was used to drive the 3 strikes laws. It was like one of the cases that were legislation that essentially said if you've gotten any convictions for violent crimes at all, the third crime means you get 25 years to life, regardless of what kind of crime it is. Which has since been modified, but like
there's a lot of nuance there.
Yeah. And she just described like her experience at the time as she grew up, and even now when people contact her and just like casually drop details about this thing that happened to her sister, even though this guy was caught, but like it's definitely re-traumatizing, like pretty much every time it happens. I thought it was a really good article to be aware of, and something that the other like article that I found the most, I think, nuance in was actually referenced as well, which I thought was interesting. They were both actually published this year. So there is a podcast called LA Not So Confidential, which is two psychologists that are discussing true crime.
Oh, no, I hadn't heard of that.
I'll send you that.
I was nodding because I like that title. I'm sorry, I realized you thought that I knew what you were talking about, but I was like, LA Non-Confident, what a good title.
Yeah. And obviously I was going to say, I'll send you the link, but I'm going to send you all the links.
Yes, please do.
But yeah, so this was an interview with the psychologist about like what makes a good, more ethical true crime like media or thing versus a docudrama, which is very salacious, which is intended not just for entertainment purposes, but is speculative. And I think that's really, I would say, like the number one thing, if you want to just pin down something as far as like ethical media consumption for true crime, I think that is the one to focus on. Is so they talk about like a media like that was like, ooh, was it like corrupt cops and incompetent cops? No, none of this actually happened at the very end. But like they'd spent, the entire episode talking about all of this and putting that thought in people's heads. And again, we're a lot likelier to believe bad things than good things.
And some people don't finish the documentary.
And some people don't finish the episode that they're watching. They just turn it, whatever. Like they get disgusted or turn it off, or they just don't have time. Right. It's notoriously we're that's what we do as people. So like I think that if you are dramatizing and like really sensationalizing bad things that didn't happen, and then you're like at the end, tee-hee, just kidding, that's not appropriate.
Yeah. I just had to look up. There's another documentary there that had a similar situation, which is I think it's called The Curious Case of Natalia Grace, which is kind of a silly title. But it was something about Natalia Grace. For those who don't know who Natalia Grace is, this was one of those true crime stories that I was following when it first hit the news. These two people adopted this young girl. She was adopted from a Eastern European country. She had many physical issues. She had a lot of mental issues as well. She also had a physical thing that essentially manifested as her looking much younger than she actually was, but not much. And if you've seen the movie Orphan is about a girl who looks like she's like 10, but is actually like 40 and is a serial killer. So these parents essentially ditched their daughter, just put her into an apartment at like 10 years old, and were like, she's basically that, like she's 30 and she was lying to us. And then of course, like a bunch of court cases happened because they abandoned their daughter, which is illegal. You're not allowed to do that. And it's like a really sad story. But if you watch the documentary, you're not totally sure that that's what happened until the very end, when they're like, no, like we did examine her, and she was like 9 when she was abandoned. So yeah, that was really bad. But the documentary pretends to not know that for the first couple episodes, which is essentially framing this girl, this child,
it's victim blaming
as a criminal. Yes, it's absolutely victim blaming, and the ethics of that, I have to say, are horrifying. And they could have easily framed it very differently and centered it very differently, but they didn't. And I agree with you that that's
like, you could have said right up
horrible.
front, this is the thing that happened, and here we're going to examine the psychology of the parents, and like what, like maybe they weren't deliberately like doing bad, but they were, just to be clear. Like if that's how you wanted to approach it, but like you get the disclaimer away, get that done. Like, just to be clear, this is an actual child that a bad thing happened to.
Yes.
And we're going to examine the psychology of the parents. Were they just misled? No, they were trash. But like,
anyway, so yes, and I absolutely agree that like the documentarians did not need to do that. They did not need to be on the side, even facetiously, for any amount of time.
And that's what the LA Not So Confidential, the psychologist talked about. You've got the documentaries, then you've got the docudramas, which are not just the recreations, but the dramatic, over sensationalized. Again, like we were talking about before, like you're at least embellishing details, if not outright inventing like things that didn't happen because it's better.
Yeah. And this is like a big conversation that's happening in true crime in general. Is how can we center the stories of victims more? I say we. How can the creators center the stories of victims more? in the early days, I would say, of this latest true crime wave, and I'm speaking of like from 2007 forward, I'm specifically when podcasts were invented, there was just a salacious focus on the perpetrators and not on the victims. And now that's changing, which I think is very, very good. And I think that a lot of podcasters are also making sure to call out that change, which I think is also very, very good. And, you know, being more conscientious with their wording, you know, being more clear and saying this is a sex worker, not a prostitute, or this is a victim instead of a body.
Or not victim blaming.
Exactly.
Well.
Yeah.
And also focusing on the fact that this person is a person and not just
right.
the vehicle through which you get your jollies.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think it gets a little bit complicated too, because I think that the people who run these podcasts and books and documentaries and things like that also have to grapple with it. So one of the big things that came with my research a lot is that this true crime boom really took off with the podcast Serial, which looked at the case of Adnan Syed in Baltimore. That's a local story to us. But Serial does not consider itself a true crime podcast. It considers itself an investigative journalism project. And I thought that was really borne out by the fact that their latest series is actually about an orca that got set free in the ocean. And like, how is it like acclimating to being around other orcas? And I think that they are absolutely practicing what they preach. Like, we are an investigative journalism.
I think that's really cool
outfit.
Because I'm just gonna add this, and we can cut it out later since this is the true crime. But like, I know that there's a big, like, one of the issues that we're currently sort of suffering under that is occurring is just that we had like a lot of really shitty breeding programs in our major aquatic theme parks, and now we have all of these, like, especially like there are some that are like can be released into the wild even though they were bred in captivity, but like orcas are not traditionally thought of as one of them. So that's actually really cool that, you know, this is maybe there are like how are we changing how we're like doing that, and like can we change it so that we can start releasing like these animals back into their natural habitat in a way that will like improve their health.
Yeah.
I think that's super cool.
I absolutely
agree.
And I'm going to go ahead and
leave
leave that in.
Good.
Because it helps with the transition into one of the reasons that I think true crime stories can be so compelling is because there is a very clear good guy and a bad guy. Like, there's a very clear what should have happened.
There should be.
Yes.
Whether or not it's correct based on fact or has been invented.
Right, exactly.
Yes.
I think that, like, it's very clear that when you are doing harm, you are the bad guy, and then there is a good guy, and like maybe that's a cop, or maybe that's the victim, or maybe that's, you know, an investigative journalist who's trying to get to the bottom of this, or maybe it's like the person fighting back against, you know, a person who broke into their house. Like, it's a very clear good guy, very clear bad guy, and also I think they're very contained. Like, there's a very clear beginning, middle, and end, right? Like,
even for the things that are unsolved, I would say, like, you can say, well, the police have put a pin in this or whatever. The last evidence that came up was X.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think that that's one of the reasons that it's also very compelling, is because it can be consumed and maybe it'll stay with you, but it's not ongoing. Like, there's closure.
Usually not affecting you as a person.
Yes. And that's another ethical thing there, that like one of the reasons that we are that we can be so compelled by these stories is because they are separated from us, so we have that distance. This was something that I found in a one second, let me scroll to it.
I'm gonna respond while you're looking.
Go ahead.
It's just something that, like, based on what you just described, it is the human desire to create order from chaos. It goes back to like just a general saying that we have, which is truth is stranger than fiction, because fiction has to make sense.
Right.
So when we're looking at true crime, we're looking at things that ostensibly happened and that we have retroactively applied a narrative to, that we can control, that we can follow, that is linear and logical, and we can start unpacking and consuming and evaluating and putting reason to, which frequently we do not find, like, just in all of the things that happen daily in our lives. I do think that's got a lot to do with it as well.
It's a catharsis that we're seeking, and we're able to find it in other people's stories. This was a paper that was published in Health Sociology Review in 2007. It's a little bit old, but they were talking about TV narratives and documentaries. And this was from Margaret Gibson, and I will obviously share the link to this. But the quote is, Writing about the extensive public mourning of Princess Diana, Richard Johnson, who's another researcher, suggests that a transference of grief occurred through Diana's death. It was a vehicle for grieving over other deaths that had not been properly mourned. The public concealment of grief as a lived reality in many people's lives can find expression or an emotional outlet in monumental public deaths and communities of mourning. And I think communities of mourning is where we find this like true crime, end quote, after communities of mourning. I think communities of mourning is where we find some of this like true crime popularity, is that we are kind of going through this together and finding the catharsis together. And I think that that's really helpful for some people. This was specifically about a major event, but the same holds true when you're watching a documentary or about when you're, reading a book about something and maybe something similar happened to you, but there's enough narrative distance that you're able to process it using that like third person processing. And I think that that's part of why true crime becomes so complicated. There are all these ethical issues, and we'll get into some more of those in a minute, I think. There's also like proven benefits. One of the major audiences of true crime is women, and they say that one of the main things that they are looking for in true crime when they are not seeking that catharsis of something that actually happened to them is they are looking for survival cues. So like, what could I have done? Could I have done in this? Because they are concerned, and there are some more statistics that I don't want to go all the way into because they're very depressing, but the vast majority of times women don't trust the police to properly help them handle that. And so there's a lot of feeling that we're on our own. And I think that was also kind of brought to the fore in the Me Too movement, where it's like, actually, some of these aren't crimes, but you are still victimized. Or some of these aren't considered crimes, or some of these aren't even considered wrong. Yeah, but you're still being victimized. So what can you do? How can you, as an individual, what individual action can you take? You can't stop the world being full of these violent people, but you can at least make sure that you are safe and that your friends are aware of things that they can do to be safe. And yes, it is morbid as hell. And that's another major criticism.
I mean, it's not like that's fair, I guess. And you're correct that it is sad and it is morbid, but like trigger warning, I guess, but like, what do you do to escape being, brutalized while walking alone to your car at night after work, or walking home from like the subway or something? Like, what are the tips and tricks? Like, and you're just asking these casually, like, to your parents, your friends, the people that you're with. How can you like signal the bartender that your date's going really bad and you need, like, all of that is things that we do just automatically. And to be fair, it's not just women, of course.
Of course not, no.
And that's something else that has come up in the ethical like discussion, is that statistically speaking, like people of color are not maybe brought forward as much as they should be based on the actual number of crimes that occur that impact them. But we do that regardless of whether or not we're watching a true crime drama. So of course, like, if there are additional avenues for education and thoughts and like solutions we may not have encountered before, like, that's absolutely reasonable for people to want to grasp onto.
Agreed.
I was actually going to say, before we move on, because we had talked about like what makes a more of an ethical like crime drama, and how when our sort of most recent new wave of true crime media consumption rose up, how people were focusing on like the perpetrators and turning them again into rock stars, and some of the commentary and criticism of some of the more recent, the Dahmer, case, the Menendez brothers cases. The casting in Hollywood has definitely, not only are these like, again, over dramatized and sensationalized to the point of fiction, but they're casting attractive people and really putting, like, again, the victim sort of not in the spotlight and not giving them a space for their stories to be told. I found a really good one, actually, that was not like that. It's called 11 Minutes. It's a 2022 documentary. It's based on the 2017 the music festival shooting in Vegas. Was one of the biggest mass shootings that we encountered in our country, and it is just the victims' stories and like them coming together and speaking out. And I thought that was actually, I watched some clips. I didn't get to watch the full series, but I thought it was actually really well done. So I totally recommend that if you are interested in learning what these people did and how they survived and just the things that they may have done differently, and just support them.
Do you want to get into the white woman's tears of it all?
No, that's gross. I mean, yes, obviously.
I'll go into it a little bit. Because of the way that modern media is, we kind of focus on the attractive people. There's an aesthetic to drama that I think we don't talk about often enough, and very much it is like a white woman victim, especially an attractive white woman victim. This got brought to the fore. There was a case a couple years ago. I don't remember exactly off the top of my head, but a white woman went missing, and her boyfriend showed up and said, "Oh yeah, she just left." And he almost certainly, well, not almost certainly, but it's clear that there was some foul play. We can't ask because he tragically took his own life very soon after that. It may be that they were both victimized. We don't know, but there was a ton of media attention and missing Indigenous women in that time that got absolutely no attention. And another thing that we can't really gloss over is that a lot of the people presenting these stories are also white women. And even though, yes, we can say that women are often disproportionately victimized, it's also true that white women are not necessarily disproportionately victimized. And I don't want to, like, in that a way doesn't really...
it like feels bad to say it like that. But like 100%. Yes, right. Absolutely.
When we say we need to start focusing on the victims, we also need to remember that we need to focus on all of these victims. You know, you can't just point out the one or two white women in this serial killer's oeuvre and say that, like, this is what made them so brutal. You have to focus on the fact that a lot of times people who are trying to get away with a crime will do so by victimizing people who aren't getting the kind of attention that, for example, a white woman would be getting in the media. And that's really depressing. When we don't talk about that, I think, is where we fall down. Because when we talk about centering victims, as I said, we want to center all victims because everyone deserves to be rescued. Everyone deserves to have effort put into solving their case. Everyone deserves to have someone care. And I think that's really important to remember.
Speaking from the place of, like, a lot of content creators in this space are women and white women. Not all of them, obviously, right. 100%. And there are some really good ones, but that are not. But I think it's sort of, how do you're looking for tips on how to survive and, like, ways to dodge bad things from happening to you. And then you're going to use that and talk about that. And you're going to find cases that mimic your experience and what would happen to you or what could happen to you. How do you sort of juggle that against what would be considered disproportionately focusing on, you know, where does the responsibility come in? Like, you're accountable for, like, the things that you put out into the world, and how can you sort of balance that? And it's just, I think people just do need to be more thoughtful, especially if you've got more than, like, 4 listeners. Yeah. Like, it is something that to just be considering as you're going forward. Like, do your personal research, do you know, consume the media that you want to consume, but how do you be responsible in what you're putting out into the world? And I think that's just something that we all have to think about.
Agreed. Do you want to get mad at capitalism for a minute?
Always. You know, I've always got a low grade burn. Go. Let's lay it out.
So the other thing is that, you know, there are people putting out this media and profiting off of these stories. And a lot of them are, as the story that you were talking about, are traumatizing, and particularly re-traumatizing to the people who are involved in them. And I don't think that we can skate past that either. I think, and that
also consider that these families that they're suffering, they're not getting money from any of this, because it's public domain.
Right.
It's awful.
And I think that when you find maybe some kind of a true crime media that you want to engage with, one thing that I guess want to make sure that we are looking for is people who are also making sure to support victims' rights organizations, support RAIN, which is an organization that helps women who have been victimized, support the initiatives to find and help the women who are being so overlooked. I think it's incredibly, incredibly important to look for those things. And if you're looking for charities to donate to, please consider some of those. We'll put a list up with this post. I think it's just so incredibly important. And I think that's a really fair commentary, you know, like the big bad guy in that one is capitalism, unfortunately.
I mean, yeah. Oh, it's always, it's Reagan or capitalism. Reagan with capitalism on its shoulders. Capitalism
For
with
those who
Reagan
are
on
new
its
to our
shoulders.
podcast, this is Kaylee's number one villain is 3 raccoons in a trench coat, except one of the raccoons is Reagan and the other raccoon is the personification of capitalism. That poor raccoon.
The third raccoon didn't know what it was getting into.
Doing its best.
I would say, obviously, you know, we're all tired. I get that. And you can't do exhaustive research on every little thing about your day. It is not possible. I get that. But if you are considering supporting anything or getting a subscription to something, putting money into something, I would ask that would be where you could potentially start doing this sort of even just mildest research possible. Like, what is listed and available? And yeah, that does mean sometimes that you don't get to continue like where it's paywalled on this really like salacious and sensational story that you want to know more about. But then you can just look up, you know, the names, like go look them up, like look up their stories, look up the victims' stories. Like there are news articles, there will inevitably be news articles that these people used as the crumbs of their over dramatized, potentially lurid retelling for the things that I would suggest are unethical to financially support potentially.
Yeah, agreed.
Just some thoughts as to things that you could potentially do if you're concerned.
There's a lot of nuance here. This is a complicated topic.
It is.
I wish that it weren't. I wish that
I
it
wish
was like
so
very
many things were
straightforward.
simple, and they're not, and it's sad. It's like that's how I know that it is exhausting. Like you genuinely cannot research every little thing that comes across your monitor or, you know, posted to you like as a suggestion from your phone or your CIA agent that's listening. Thanks, Steve.
Thanks, Steve. Why did we decide to stay with Steve?
Our guy at home is Craig, so I don't know. I think that's our guy is Steve.
That's fascinating. I love that. Steve is in our studio. In studio with us. Steve! Oh my God, cut that out.
Stop with your algorithm, Steve.
What is some more true crime media that you have engaged with that you felt did it well?
That's a good question. Well, like I said, I mentioned it earlier, actually. The 11 minutes documentary like series that's discussing specifically like the victim stories. I think I would really recommend that, actually. It's relative, like I don't consume a lot of true crime media myself, so I don't have a lot of like references that I would just in general pull from, good or bad, outside of what research I've done here and just knowing in general that it was an issue. Because when I did start to research, you know, oh, everybody's into true crime now. Like, what is this? And like, oh, don't like that. I'm going to put my time into straight up fiction because I know they're not real victims, you know?
Yeah. Let's look into ancient Chinese history.
Yeah, guys, I know I am who I am as a person.
I love it. No, I'm so glad you did.
I mean, like, I will say that I do like the less hurtful, traumatizing. So again, the white collar crime, just because again, it does lean into my capitalism is always the enemy. Greed is the enemy, greed and selfishness. And it's very clear like that there are bad guys. And yes, there are people that did lose everything. And I'm not trying to lessen their suffering in any way, but they're alive to talk about it. And they can also say, I don't want you to include, like, you know, you can't include me in your, you know, and there's only so much you can do there, obviously. But they can tell their stories and they have been interviewed. And there's not the trauma of losing a loved one in violence or just silence. And I will say that I prefer those documentaries that I have watched about like pyramid schemes and like fuck the Bitcoin guy. Oh my God, that's the one. I'll have to look that one up now that I think about it. That guy that was like on the ground level with Bitcoin and was just committing massive fraud.
No.
And like, oh my God, yeah, no, that was actually really good. I liked that read a lot. I'll find that for you.
Yes,
that was fun. But speaking of what we were talking about most of this episode, I do want to just revisit 11 minutes. I do think that that would be my recommendation. Yeah. So what about you, Annie?
I have a little bit of a meta recommendation. It's called I'll Be Gone in the Dark. It's a documentary on HBO, and it is about a true crime writer. So she was investigating the Golden State Killer, the original Night Stalker. And gosh, it's so difficult because she was actually working with the detectives on the case. So the people who were investigating the cold case, because this happened like back in the 70s and it was a huge deal. And one of the things that people point to is like why we lock our doors. And She passed away. She unfortunately died by suicide before this documentary came out, before her book came out about this. And she was very much centering the victims' stories. And the documentary also very much centers the victims' stories. And they speak to her researcher, her husband. I guess it's worth noting her husband is Patton Oswalt. And he does appear multiple times in the show. And she was just a very popular true crime writer and researcher. And they talk about it in the show about like some of her editors and people saying, you know, like, I understand why I shouldn't say she died by suicide. She died of a drug overdose. And they're saying, I don't, it's clear to me why she got into drugs, because like we could just go home and stop worrying about this. But then she was writing this book and she genuinely felt she was on the trail of this man. And the man was in fact found and identified with DNA and genetic genealogy, I want to say within like 2 weeks after the book was released. So Patton Oswalt and her head researcher told the story about how when they were on the press tour for the book, when they got the news that the Golden State Killer had been caught. And that was incredible. And there is a union of the victims because there were so many, and it was very cathartic to watch, and obviously very tragic to watch this woman's journey and her dedication to this and how it swallowed her up. And some good did come out of it, and the victims are very much represented, and there are, you know, like calls for supporting victims in general at the end of the documentary. It was very difficult, I will say. Again, curate your own experience. This is a story, the Golden State Killer brutalized and raped his victims, and if you are not comfortable experiencing that even through the past, even through documentary, please be careful. But I will say it was very, very well done, and they did a very, very good job at honoring the real victims there. All right, so I do want to end this episode by saying, please take care of yourselves. We are going to post links to RAIN and to the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women's Fund, because those are concepts that are near and dear to our hearts. And if you have any true crime recommendations that center on victims, specifically victims of historically marginalized groups, we would love to hear them. Send them in. You can send them to inksinkpodcast@gmail.com, or you can DM us on Instagram. I have been loving all of your Instagram DMs. Thank you all. I recently posted a story that said I wanted to hear about everybody's most impactful or most exciting books of 2024. I didn't want to hear the best. I wanted to hear your favorites. So
that's right.
Thank you for everyone who has written in. I'll probably make a list. And if you want to tell us what you're reading, please do. We might give you a shout out on air.
Absolutely. Also, we just like recommendations.
Yeah, we like...
Give us recommendations.
Yes, tell us. We like reading books. Books are good for you. Do you have a Kaylee Coda for us today?
I think be thoughtful, and again, protect yourself. Understand that you can't do all things all of the time, but like, you know, when your footprint becomes greater, where it might actually, you know, give support to somebody that is a content creator, make sure that that content creator is not taking advantage of people that have already suffered and are suffering. I think that's like my only thought. It's not like as neatly tied up as some things, unfortunately, but that's how I try to live. It'll help you sleep better at night, frankly.
And if we missed anything, please let us know. Again, email us or DM us wherever you scroll, and you can find us wherever you find podcasts. And you can find us also on socials, Instagram, Facebook. I have not gotten on Blue Sky. Should I get on Blue Sky, friends? Let me know. And you can always email us at inksinkpodcast@gmail.com. Thank you for listening.
Thank you.